but in some particular cases, not all of them were ladies. As promised, I would share the top 5 sex stories that have happened with our company. Now I'm going to start mild with this one. This one happened and I was actually working myself, and we used to work a nightclub that was called Backstreets. And Backstreets was known as a gay club, but a lot of straight people went there. The reason why, it had a 24-hour liquor license. So even after all the restaurants in Atlanta closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, then everybody would go to Backstreets because they knew they could serve 24 hours a day. So at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, our parking lot would get packed. So I would literally take a nap at night and then get up at like 11 or 12 o'clock and go down to this parking lot and deal with it with my valets. And boy, do we have some stories. This one lady, she got out of her car and she had to be in her mid-40s. And she was an attractive lady, but me and my other coworker, we were sitting there and this lady, her boob was out. I hate to say it, but it was just completely out. So my friend and I are looking at each other and we're like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? This lady's in her trunk around and she's completely innocent and everything like that. And we're like, is she joking with us? And she gets out the car and she's like, oh, I have to get a book because it gets boring inside this club and I'm meeting some friends. She pays us and she's walking up the street and we're like, ma'am. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't even control these things anymore. When you get my age, they go anywhere and everywhere and you have no idea what they're doing. That was insane. At the same parking lot, we would see, I guess the best way of saying, true ladies of the night. But in some particular cases, not all of them were ladies. This one particular person we had dubbed Victoria's Secret. Her name was Victoria, and she had a secret, and you would never know until you got in the car with her. So she used to walk up and down the street, and I have to tell you, I'm not into that, but this was an attractive person. So 95% of the people would have been tricked. So she would walk up and down the street and constantly get into different cars. And we're like, oh my God. And we wanted to see how long it would take before people would realize. Now, one thing she couldn't change was her voice. And when you spoke with her, she still had kind of a deep tone to her voice. So she was very dainty and would use very little words. So all the time, she was probably the most popular person that we would see on this strip, but she would get picked up all the time. This one particular time, she got picked up and this car got her in the car and they were talking to her and she finally got in the vehicle. Then we see them drive up the block and then we see the car skid and then we see she goes flying out of the car. So one of the valets goes running down to make sure he is okay, but they were not. This is during the time, I'm surprised nothing more happened because that's a very dangerous proposition where you put yourself in a position where people are, if they find that out, they may actually try to shoot someone. So we are lucky that didn't happen, but she was okay. But that was Victoria's Secret that we used to always see down in this walking. Every single night we were down there, she was there. She was very consistent and a very hard worker, but that's something that you don't want to see on a daily basis. This is a story I hate to admit, but it happens. The valets, the servers, the bartenders will always find customers to have sex with, and it happens all the time. There was one particular case where a server came out of the restaurant with a girl he had met from the bar. And this is later on in the evening, so they don't have as many tables. And he wanted the keys to his car so he can go get in the car and have relations with some of these customers that you would not believe. So what they would ultimately do would get their car, get in and go across the street. But what they don't realize, there was a bright light behind their car, so it would shine everything they're doing like a projection screen to us across the street. So we could see completely everything that they were doing. And boy, were there stories. There's stuff that happened that shouldn't happen. There's stuff that we've seen that we shouldn't have seen. But it was interesting. I would like to go into more details like I did on telling stories before, but this is pretty crazy. Let's just say there's a lot of sex there. There's a lot of stuff being thrown out of cars and things like that. But this is one of those moments where you sit there and go, oh my God, I should write a book. I should really write a book on some of the stuff that we've seen out in these fields. Now, the next story was pretty funny. this is one of those situations where I walk into the parking lot and it's about midnight and I'm sitting there and it had been raining. So it was a nice steady rain and you look at the cars and there's all these droplets and I'm talking to the valets and all of a sudden I see a car to my side just moving and vibrating. And what I see really that's catching my attention, the droplets on the hood are just moving like this. So I'm like, what in the world's going on? I look in and all I see are 2 feet up in the air. And I look at the valets and they're like, we wanted to see how long it would take you to notice. They had been watching for the past 30 minutes. And it was hilarious. I was wondering why they were up front in the front of the lot, but this is basically a customer that came out, had relations in the car. And when they got out of the car, this is the thing that kills me. They have a straight people out in the parking lot. Now, here's the thing. When you have alcohol and when you have all these other things happening, that combination, you know what's going to happen. I've been approached several times by women that wanted to take us home. And a lot of times morally, I'm not going to do that. If I'm in a relationship, that's definitely the last thing I'm going to do. This next story, one of my employees actually rents one of my homes. So remember on my M3 story, when they stole my car out of the trailer, I ended up putting this car in this home because I knew it was a 2-car garage and the employee only had 1 car. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to put the M3 over here. Please don't bother it. So I get there and one day I'm looking at it and I see fingerprints on top of this car. I'm like, yeah, and I'm really particular about my cars. I wax them all the time. It wasn't a car cover on it, but I did notice something was a little off and I don't usually have fingerprints on top of my hood. So I asked the employee, I'm like, what happened? He's like, Alex, we need to talk. I said, what? You remember this story that we had in the office a couple of weeks ago? This employee basically had relations with a customer that came into the restaurant. She was only in town for a few days and he had his way with her for 2, 3, maybe even 4 days. So what the valet did, he texted her and her husband responded and said, why are you texting my wife in the middle of the night? The valet had no idea that she had a husband and he was very upset. So he said, did you have relations with my wife? And his answer, the best answer was, I think you need to ask your wife that question. So that was pretty ugly. So bringing that into the conversation, the next day, he's like, you remember when you saw those fingerprints on the hood of your car or the roof of your car? I said, yes. He's like, that was her. I said, what? He's like, don't worry. We didn't have sex in your car. We only had sex leaning against your car. And I was pissed. That is something you just do not do. You do not do that. That's violating my baby. Don't do that. So needless to say, I was really pissed off about it. I moved the M3 out of that garage. It was no longer there anymore. And it's a funny story that we can share with folks like you.
Homeowners insurance may just seem like some boring thing that you have to get a mortgage, but it can be a surprising way to actually save a lot of money. Policy Genius is your advocate to do that. They shop your policy and your insurance needs amongst all the major carriers and find you the best deal. In fact, every time it renews, Policy Genius does it all over again. They check everybody else, they make sure you're getting the best deal, and if there's a better deal out there, they switch you for free. Policy Genius can also bundle your homeowner's policy with your car insurance policy and save you even more. Policy Genius has saved their combined auto and home insurance customers an average of $1,127 a year. So visit the link in the description below, tell them a little bit about yourself and your property, and they'll tell you if you're getting the best deal. Be sure to thank them for their support of VINwiki.